The alarm's harsh buzz sliced through my consciousness at 4:30 a.m., its insistent drone echoing off the water-stained walls of my studio apartment. I didn't need it anymore. My body had long since adapted to this ungodly schedule, but I kept it as a reminder of normalcy, of the life I used to have when waking up early meant something more than avoiding the judgmental stares of my coworkers. The photos on my wall seemed to mock me in the pre-dawn darkness. My daughter's graduation photo, taken 5 years ago, captured her mid-laugh, unaware that in 2 years she'd stop taking my calls. My son's last Little League game, where he pitched a perfect inning. Now he responds to my texts with single words, if at all. The frames were dusty. I couldn't bring myself to clean them any more than I could bring myself to take them down. My morning routine was a practiced dance of resignation. Instant coffee that tasted like warm dirt, a frozen breakfast sandwich that never quite thawed in the middle, and the same wrinkled uniform I'd worn all week. The name tag read Tony in faded letters, the Y almost invisible after years of wear. Below it, maintenance engineer, a fancy title for someone who spent their days fixing rusted bolts and greasing ancient chains. The drive to Paradise Park was always surreal at this hour. Orlando's usually bustling streets were empty, save for the occasional delivery truck or early morning jogger. The park's entrance loomed ahead, its once bright colors now dulled by years of Florida sun and neglect. The giant smiling sun logo above the gate had a crack running through it, making its cheerful expression seem more like a grimace. "Mendoza," my supervisor's voice carried across the empty parking lot as I walked in. Dave was already sweating in the humid morning air, his safety vest straining against his belly. "Got a special job for you today." I knew what was coming before he said it. The younger mechanics had been whispering about it all week, their voices dropping to hushed tones whenever I passed by. The Soul Ripper, the park's infamous haunted roller coaster, had been acting up again. "The sensors are going haywire," Dave explained, not meeting my eyes. "Weight distribution's all wrong. Emergency stops triggering for no reason. Keep it quiet, though. Last thing we need is more bad press." I nodded, accepting the work order with steady hands that belied my unease. 20 years ago, I'd designed rides like this across the country. My name had meant something in the industry. Now here I was, reduced to maintaining a dying attraction in a failing park. But machines, they still made sense to me. They followed rules, patterns. They could be fixed. If only I'd known then about the rules I'd have to follow. If only I'd recognized that the Soul Ripper's patterns weren't mechanical at all, but something far more sinister. The maintenance locker beneath the Soul Ripper was a world unto itself. At 5:15 a.m., the metal stairs leading down creaked beneath my weight, each step echoing in the darkness like someone following close behind. The air grew thicker as I descended, carrying that peculiar mix of motor oil, metal shavings, and something else. Something that reminded me of old pennies and decay. My keyring held 15 identical-looking keys, but my fingers found the right one instinctively. The lock always stuck on humid mornings, requiring a specific twist and pull motion I'd perfected over months. Today, it turned smoothly. Too smoothly. Like someone had recently oiled it. The overhead fluorescent buzzed reluctantly to life when I flipped the switch, casting an uneven glow across the cramped space. Shadows danced along the walls, thrown by shelves overcrowded with spare parts and forgotten tools. A half-empty bottle of industrial cleaner cast a particularly unsettling silhouette, like a hunched figure watching from the corner. I needed the maintenance manual. It should have been where it always was, on the metal desk bolted to the far wall. Instead, I found it tucked behind a stack of old work orders, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. The pages felt different today, warmer, almost alive against my fingertips. That's when I noticed the writing. It wasn't the usual maintenance logs or inspection notes. These were messages scrawled in the margins, the handwriting growing increasingly frantic as it spiraled around the technical diagrams. The ink seemed fresher on some notes than others, as if multiple people had added to them over time. The first rule caught my eye immediately. Always grease the third cart at the start of your shift, even if it doesn't need it. I'd worked on hundreds of rides in my career, written dozens of maintenance protocols. Nothing ever required such specific, seemingly arbitrary maintenance. My eyes traced down the page, finding more rules, each more bizarre than the last. Do not inspect the tracks between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. You won't be alone. A metallic tapping sound echoed from somewhere behind me. I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Nothing, just the usual clutter of tools and spare parts. But as I turned back to the manual, I could have sworn one of the wrenches on the workbench had moved slightly. The final rule was written larger than the others, the letters pressed so deeply into the page they'd nearly torn through. The manual must stay in the locker. Taking it anywhere else will wake them. Another tap, closer this time. Then another, like footsteps on metal, moving across the ceiling. I told myself it was just the ride settling, metal contracting in the morning air. 20 years of engineering knowledge said that's all it could be. But engineering knowledge didn't explain why my reflection in the locker's small mirror seemed to lag slightly behind my movements. Or why, when I looked at the manual again, the handwriting seemed to shift and change, like living things squirming across the page. A drop of water, at least I hoped it was water, fell from somewhere above, landing on the open manual. The liquid was dark, too dark, and as it soaked into the page, the words around it seemed to writhe. The tapping had stopped. The silence that replaced it felt expectant, like the whole room was holding its breath. Waiting. I slammed the manual shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fluorescent light flickered once, twice, and in those brief moments of darkness, I could have sworn I saw other reflections in the mirror. Faces that weren't mine, mouths opened in silent screams. Dawn was breaking as I climbed the maintenance ladder to the track, the metal rungs slick with morning dew. The Soul Ripper loomed above me, its twisting track silhouetted against the purple-orange sky like a twisted skeleton. 20 years of engineering experience told me the third cart couldn't possibly need greasing. We'd done a full maintenance check just last week. But those words in the manual seemed to pulse in my mind, an urgent whisper I couldn't ignore. The cart lineup stretched before me. 12 identical vehicles, their black paint scratched and faded from years of Florida sun. The third cart sat innocently among them, nothing outwardly special about it. I ran my usual checks first: safety restraints, wheel alignment, brake pads. Everything was perfect, exactly as it should be. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the grease gun. The weight of it felt wrong, like it had grown heavier since yesterday. As I positioned it near the wheel assembly, something peculiar caught my eye. Tiny scratches around the grease fittings, arranged in patterns that almost looked like letters. The first drop of grease hit the fitting, and the metal gave an audible sigh. Not the normal release of pressure, but something that sounded almost relieved. The sound resonated through the entire track, making the rail beneath my feet vibrate at a frequency that set my teeth on edge. Movement caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just my shadow, stretching long across the track in the rising sun. But shadows don't move against the light. Shadows don't have depth, and shadows definitely don't watch you with empty, hungry eyes. I forced myself to keep working, methodically applying grease to each fitting. The temperature seemed to drop with each pump of the gun, until I could see my breath hanging in the air. Impossible for a Florida morning. The grease itself had changed color, turning darker, almost black, as it disappeared into the mechanism. A whisper of movement made me turn toward the ride's entrance. The gargoyles, those ugly concrete monstrosities that had always seemed like a cheap addition to the ride's aesthetic, had shifted. I was certain they had been facing outward when I started, their grotesque faces leering at approaching guests. Now they stared inward, their stone eyes fixed on the exact spot where I stood. Rule 3 slammed into my memory. If the gargoyles at the entrance are facing inward, leave the park immediately. My hands fumbled with the grease gun, nearly dropping it as I secured it to my tool belt. The metal walkway swayed slightly under my feet as I moved toward the maintenance ladder, each step echoing metallically through the structure. The echo came back wrong, like there were too many footsteps, some of them moving in different directions. The third cart creaked behind me, its safety restraint slowly rising on its own, with a hydraulic hiss. In the growing light, I could see dark stains on the seat that hadn't been there before, spreading like ink across the fabric. I practically flew down the ladder, my feet barely touching the rungs. The maintenance locker beckoned, a fool's sanctuary, but better than being exposed on the track. As I yanked the door open, a sound floated down from above, the mechanical whir of the ride powering up. But the power wasn't supposed to be connected for another 2 hours. The control panel in the booth above still showed dark and dead, yet I could hear the chain lift engaging, the rhythmic click-click-click of a cart being pulled up the first hill. And underneath that familiar sound, something else. A low, pleased hum, like a predator finally spotting its prey. I slammed the locker door behind me, hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. In the small mirror on the wall, I caught a glimpse of my face, pale, sweating, eyes wide with poorly contained panic. But for a split second, between one blink and the next, it wasn't my face at all. It was someone else's. Someone whose eyes held the same terror I felt, their mouth frozen in a silent scream. The tapping had started again, making its way across the ceiling toward the door. This time, it sounded like something counting. The park closed at 9 p.m., but darkness had crept in hours earlier, bringing with it a thick blanket of humidity that made the air feel like soup. I'd spent the day avoiding the Soul Ripper, finding excuses to work on other rides, a stuck safety bar on the carousel, a faulty sensor on the Ferris wheel. But now, with the last stragglers heading toward the exits, I couldn't put it off any longer. The final maintenance check was mandatory. Park policy. 20 minutes of inspection that stretched into an eternity under the flickering sodium lights. Paradise Park was different after hours. The cheerful music that usually masked the groan of aging machinery had stopped, leaving only the distant hum of the parking lot lights and the soft buzz of insects drawn to their glow. My footsteps echoed oddly on the concrete, as if the sound was being swallowed by something just out of sight. I checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. The massive frame of the Soul Ripper cut a jagged hole in the star-filled sky above, its black silhouette seeming to shift and writhe, even though the ride sat motionless. The usual safety lights along the track were out, all of them, which was impossible according to every safety protocol I'd ever written. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks with the metal structure. But wind doesn't giggle. Wind doesn't sound like children whispering secrets in the dark. The laughter floated down from the queue area, high-pitched and melodic, carrying an undercurrent of something that made my skin crawl. Rule 5 burned in my mind. If you hear laughter coming from the queue after the park closes, do not investigate. I gripped my flashlight tighter, its beam weak against the pressing darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to walk away, to forget about the mandatory inspection. But 20 years of professional pride kept my feet moving forward, even as the laughter grew louder, more distinct. The queue area was a maze of switchbacks and metal railings, all leading to the loading platform. My flashlight beam caught movement ahead. The turnstiles were spinning slowly, clicking through their rotations as if invisible people were passing through. The small counter display ticked upward. 1, 2, 3. The laughter changed then, dropping in pitch until it didn't sound childlike at all. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the metal railings, seeming to circle around me like a predator stalking its prey. In the brief sweeps of my flashlight, I caught glimpses of impossible things. Shadows moving against shadows, faces pressing through the metal bars like they were made of putty, hands reaching out only to dissolve when the light touched them. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, each one carrying away a little more of my warmth, my courage, my sanity. The counter kept ticking. 7, 8, 9. Something brushed against my back, a touch so cold it burned through my uniform shirt. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness. In its strobing light, I saw them. Figures standing in the queue lines, their forms flickering like bad television reception. Each one wore the same expression of frozen terror, their mouths open in silent screams. The turnstile made one final click. 13. My flashlight died. In the sudden darkness, the laughter returned, no longer trying to sound human, no longer trying to hide its hunger. It rose from the depths of the queue area like smoke, wrapping around me with fingers of sound that pressed against my ears, my eyes, my mouth, trying to find a way in. I ran. Behind me, the control panel in the operator's booth suddenly blazed to life, its switches and buttons flipping on their own as the ride's systems engaged. The chain lift started its familiar climb, but the sound was wrong, wet somehow, like metal grinding against something soft and yielding. As I reached the relative safety of the maintenance shed, I heard the distinct click of safety restraints locking into place, followed by the sound of the ride beginning its first drop. But there was something else mixed in with the mechanical noises, screams that couldn't possibly be coming from empty cars. Morning came too soon, bringing with it Dave's insistence on running test cycles. "Corporate's sending inspectors next week," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Need to make sure everything's running smooth." I wanted to tell him about the laughter, about the turnstiles moving on their own, about the impossible shadows that had chased me through the darkness. But 20 years in the industry had taught me what happened to maintenance workers who started talking about haunted rides. Instead, I nodded and climbed the steps to the control booth. The morning sun did nothing to dispel the otherworldly atmosphere that clung to the Soul Ripper. If anything, the harsh light made it worse, revealing details I'd somehow never noticed before. The way the track's twists formed patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. How the paint seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The subtle wrongness in the angles of the support beams. The pre-ride checklist was routine. Power systems, brake lines, safety sensors. Everything read normal on the digital displays, though the screens seemed to flicker whenever I looked away, numbers changing in my peripheral vision, only to snap back when I focused on them. I initiated the test cycle, watching as the empty train of cars began its climb up the first hill. The weight sensors blinked to life, displaying the load distribution across each car. My heart stopped. The sensors showed an odd number of passengers. Rule 4 screamed in my head. Never allow an odd number of passengers on the ride. If it happens, manually shut it down before the final drop. My hands flew to the emergency stop button, but it wouldn't depress. The plastic was warm to the touch, almost hot, and seemed to pulse under my fingers like something alive. The ride continued its ascent, the chain lift's rhythmic clicking sounding more and more like laughter with each passing second. I tried the backup shutdown, the circuit breakers, even the main power switch. Nothing responded. The ride was in control now, and it knew I knew. Through the booth's windows, I could see each car clearly as they crested the first hill. Empty. All of them empty. But the weight sensors continued their impossible readout, showing a single passenger somewhere in the train. The front car reached the top, and for a split second I saw it. A figure sitting in the front seat, its form like a tear in reality, darkness spilling out around its edges. It turned to look at me, and where its face should have been was just wrong. Like someone had taken all the geometry I understood about the human form and twisted it into something that shouldn't exist. I stumbled back from the window, my hip catching the edge of the control panel. Static electricity crackled between my fingers and the metal surface, and in that moment, all the screens went black. When they flickered back to life, every display showed the same message. You shouldn't have read the rules. The ride plunged down its first drop, and the scream that echoed across the park wasn't mechanical at all. It was the sound of something ancient and hungry finally breaking free. Through the booth's window, I watched in horror as dark liquid began seeping from the track's joints, running down the support beams in thick rivulets. The third car, the one I'd greased just yesterday, was leaving a trail of that same darkness behind it, like an ink stain spreading across the morning sky. When the train hit the final brake run, I forced myself to look at the front car. It was empty again, but the seat was wet, glistening with something that moved and shifted even when the car was perfectly still. The weight sensors finally went dark, but not before showing one last reading. 0 passengers. Not empty. 0. As if whatever had been riding had subtracted from reality itself. After that morning, the Soul Ripper began to change. Subtle at first. So subtle I thought lack of sleep was making me hallucinate. But with each passing day, the changes became more pronounced, more impossible to ignore. It started with the reflective panels that lined the queue area. They'd always been there, cheap funhouse mirrors installed to entertain guests waiting in line. But now they showed something else. Not reflections, memories. The first one appeared during my morning inspection. A teenage boy, maybe 16, his Letterman jacket bright against the dark metal of the ride. He was laughing, high-fiving friends I couldn't see. The timestamp in the corner read, June 15th, 1998. I recognized his face from the missing persons database I'd obsessively searched after that first night. Marcus Chen disappeared during grad night 25 years ago. The image lasted only seconds before dissolving into ordinary reflection, but by afternoon, more had appeared. A young couple in matching Disney shirts, holding hands as they waited in line. Sarah and Tom Reynolds vanished during their honeymoon in 2003. Their faces were captured mid-smile, unaware they'd never leave the park. Each panel became a window into the Soul Ripper's history of horror. A family of 3 waving at a camera that no longer existed. A group of college students making silly faces. A little girl in a princess dress, cotton candy staining her lips blue. All of them real. All of them gone. I spent hours documenting each appearance, cross-referencing faces against missing persons reports. The ride was showing me its trophies, its collection of stolen souls. Some images were crystal clear, while others appeared distorted, like photographs left too long in water. But all of them held the same terrible knowledge in their eyes, visible in their last captured moments. The realization that something was wrong, that the ride they'd boarded wasn't just a roller coaster. Late that night, As I was locking up the maintenance locker, my own reflection caught my eye in the small mirror on the wall. For a moment, it looked normal. Then the image began to change. My face remained, but it wasn't the present me. It was younger, from 20 years ago when I still designed rides. I watched in horror as dark liquid began seeping from my reflection's eyes, nose, and mouth. My skin grew pale and translucent, like something that had lived too long in the dark. The reflection moved independently, reaching out as if pressing against the glass from the other side. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and behind it, I could see others, hundreds of faces, all pressed together, all trying to break through. The mirror cracked. In the spiderweb pattern of the broken glass, each fragment showed a different victim. Their voices began to filter through, a cacophony of whispers that made my ears bleed. You read the rules. You know what it is now. It's been so hungry. You're next. You're next. You're next. I fled the locker, but not before seeing my reflection one last time. It wasn't screaming anymore. It was smiling, and behind its teeth, I could see the same darkness that leaked from the ride's joints, that stained the third car's seats, that filled the spaces between reality where the Soul Ripper had worn them thin. The ride had been collecting souls for decades, storing them in every reflective surface, every shadow, every space where light couldn't quite reach. And now it was showing them to me. Not as a warning, I realized, but as a promise. Because in every reflection, in every memory it showed me, my face was starting to appear in the background, watching, waiting. Already there, even in scenes from years before I'd started working at the park. The Soul Ripper wasn't just showing me its past victims, it was showing me my future. The decision came at 3 a.m., in that hollow space between night and morning where reality feels thinnest. I had to end it. 20 years of engineering knowledge told me every ride had a breaking point, even haunted ones. I'd spent days studying the original blueprints, looking for vulnerabilities. The control panel on the highest point of the lift hill controlled everything: primary systems, backups, even the antique hydraulics from the original construction. Destroy that, and the whole ride would be dead, or so I told myself. My hands shook as I loaded my toolbox. Wrench, wire cutters, screwdrivers, normal tools for a normal repair job. The weight felt wrong, though, like the metal had become denser, heavier, with purpose. The manual sat on my workbench, its pages now stained with that dark liquid that seemed to seep from everywhere. The maintenance ladder felt endless. Each rung burned cold against my palms, the metal almost brittle in the pre-dawn air. The laughter started around the 20th step, that high, childlike giggle that had haunted my dreams for weeks. Only now it came from above, not the queue area. Halfway up, I made the mistake of looking down. The ground below had changed, stretching away into impossible distance, as if the ride had grown taller while I climbed. The park's lights twisted in nauseating patterns, forming symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. Just machinery, I whispered, my breath visible in the unnaturally cold air. Just gears and motors and... The metal under my hands pulsed, like a heartbeat. At the top platform, the wind howled with voices. I recognized some of them now. Marcus Chen's teenage laughter, Sarah Reynolds calling her husband's name, that little girl in the princess dress asking if the ride was scary. The control panel loomed before me, its surfaces reflecting faces that shouldn't be there. I reached for my tools, but the toolbox had changed. The metal had gone black, not with paint, but with depth, as if it had become a window into absolute darkness. When I touched it, ripples spread across its surface like disturbed water. The manual's warning echoed in my mind. Taking it anywhere else will wake them. Too late, I realized my mistake. In my desperation to end this, I'd brought both the manual and my tools up here, away from the locker. The control panel erupted in sparks, but they fell upward, defying gravity. Each one contained a face, a memory, a scream. The ride groaned, a sound so deep it rattled my bones and made my teeth ache. The entire structure began to move, not like a machine, but like something organic stretching after a long sleep. Dark liquid began pouring from every joint and seam, running upward instead of down, collecting in a writhing mass above the platform. In its depths, I saw faces, hundreds of them, thousands maybe. Every victim the Soul Ripper had ever claimed, now part of its grotesque anatomy. My tools melted, bleeding that same darkness. The manual's pages fluttered open on their own, the rules now writing themselves across every surface of the platform in that same frantic handwriting. You shouldn't have brought us up here. You shouldn't have tried to break it. You shouldn't have read the rules. You shouldn't. The darkness reached for me with hands made of shadow and memory, each finger tipped with reflective surfaces, showing my own face contorted in terror. The wind carried the sound of metal tearing, but under that, I heard something worse. The Soul Ripper wasn't just awake now, it was hungry. Paradise Park opened right on schedule the next morning. The sun rose over Orlando like it always did, painting the sky in cotton candy colors that seemed obscene after what had happened in the dark hours before dawn. The parking lot filled with minivans and excited children, none of them noticing that the Soul Ripper's black frame seemed darker today, its angles somehow sharper against the morning sky. No one reported Tony Mendoza missing. In a theme park with high turnover and minimum wage workers, people disappeared all the time. They moved on, found better jobs, gave up. Dave simply marked it as another resignation, though his hands trembled as he filed the paperwork. The Soul Ripper ran perfectly that day. Its machinery purred with a new smoothness, as if something had finally clicked into place. The lines were longer than usual, guests drawn to the ride's improved appearance. The paint looked fresher, the metal gleamed, and even the gargoyles seemed more detailed, more alive. In the middle of the afternoon, a 12-year-old girl named Emma Williams noticed something strange as her car crested the first hill. The metal surface beside her seat had become reflective, like a mirror. In it, she saw a man's face, tired, haunted, his uniform stained with something dark that moved like oil. He seemed to be trying to say something. His mouth moved urgently, forming the same words over and over. Read the rules. Please, read the rules. But the car had already begun its descent. In the control booth, the weight sensors displayed impossible readings. Numbers that went backwards, percentages greater than 100, negative masses that made the computer screens glitch and distort. The ride operator blinked, and for a moment, all the displays showed the same message. Tony says hello. By closing time, no one remembered the girl in car 3, or noticed that her photo had already appeared in the reflective panels along the queue. Her face frozen in that exact moment of realization. She became another trophy in the Soul Ripper's collection, another memory trapped in its twisted frame. In the maintenance locker, the manual sat innocently on its shelf, its pages now containing a new rule written in fresh, dark ink. If you see Tony in the reflections, run. He's not trying to warn you anymore. He's trying to feed. The next morning, a new maintenance worker found a set of rules scrawled in the margins. The first one caught his eye immediately. Always grease the third cart at the start of your shift, even if it doesn't need it. Above the park, the Soul Ripper's silhouette seemed to shift in the rising sun, its track twisting into impossible geometries before settling back into its familiar shape. The gargoyles turned their heads inward, their stone faces split by hungry grins. The ride had changed that night, evolved. It wasn't just haunted anymore. It had become something else entirely. Every bolt, every wire, every inch of track now pulsed with the combined essence of its victims. Their souls had become its fuel, their memories its consciousness, their screams its voice. And in every reflective surface, the metal tracks, the safety restraints, the mirrors in the queue, Tony's face watched and waited. He had become part of it now, not just another trapped soul, but something worse. An ambassador, a lure, a recruiter for its ever-growing hunger. The Soul Ripper had finally found the perfect maintenance worker, one who would stay with it forever, one who understood machinery, who knew how to keep it running, who could help it feed, one who had read the rules, and in reading them, had become part of them. The park speakers crackled to life, playing their cheerful morning music. But underneath the melody, if you listened carefully, you could hear other sounds. The clicking of machinery that moved too smoothly to be purely mechanical, the whispers of trapped souls, and the soft, constant sound of Tony's laughter, echoing from somewhere deep within the ride's dark heart. The Soul Ripper was ready for another day of operation, and it was always looking for new maintenance workers.